To the Point with Michael Williams.
Good morning. You'll be unwrapping presents soon, and soon after that, we'll be unwrapping the 2024 political year. And this morning, we're focusing on the two Floridians at the heart of so much of that. Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, and of course, the former president, Donald Trump. Florida, as always, front and center when it comes to political futures. My guest today, Isadora Rangel, Miami Herald Editorial Board, and before that, many years as a Treasure Coast reporter, and of course, always the one and only Brian Crowley, our News Channel 5 political analyst for so many years. Appreciate you both being with us, and we'll start off right away. Let's talk Ron DeSantis as we move to the new year. Kind of look where he is and where you think he's going, Brian. We'll start with you.
Well, this is make or break time for Ron DeSantis. You know, we have the Iowa caucuses coming up pretty quickly, and then the New Hampshire primary. And he is basically all in the Iowa caucuses, and he needs to do very, very well there in order to survive and do well in New Hampshire. But,
is it win or leave if you don't win Iowa? Because as you pointed out, one candidate after another, from Huckabee through Ted Cruz, did well in Iowa and sunk after that. But is it make or break for him there?
You know, a lot of it will depend on how much money he has left when he gets done with Iowa. You know, New Hampshire's a week later, and then you have Nevada and South Carolina. And a lot will depend on just how big a win Donald Trump has if he does win. A lot will depend on how well Nikki Haley does. She just recently got Governor Sununu of New Hampshire to endorse her candidacy. So it's going to be a real struggle for Ron DeSantis in this make or break period of time. But New Hampshire, I mean, Iowa's been known to surprise people, so I'm not going to be stunned if he pulls it off in Iowa.
January 15th, Iowa caucuses. A week later, New Hampshire, South Carolina, I believe February 24th, if memory serves.
January 25th is
no, New Hampshire. I already jumped ahead to South Carolina after that on into February. Isadora.
Poor New Hampshire, no respect.
Yeah, no. But your take as we go Iowa, then New Hampshire, then on into South Carolina, Nikki Haley territory, at least nominally it was, but with former President Trump taking all the oxygen out of the room. First, your take on the landscape for Ron DeSantis as we move forward.
I mean, I agree this is make or break for him. In Iowa, he has visited all 99 counties in Iowa. He's really investing time and resources there. But we have to remember that people who usually win Iowa don't go on to win the presidential nomination. So even if he does well in Iowa, what does that mean? I mean, it's still unclear. I still think that he will keep going if he loses Iowa. I mean, the name of his campaign has been Never Back Down or something along those lines. And I think Ron DeSantis will keep going as long as he has the money to keep doing that.
Isadora, what are the prognosticators, the pundits saying about where, at least arguably, it's gone off track for him? I mean, he's somebody who started out with such promise, lots of positive national media attention, and then of late you have saying, you hear the headlines, it's a dumpster fire. He went too far right, trying to appeal to people already said, we don't want Trump light, we want the real thing. What's the sense of it from where you sit?
Yeah, very interesting. He was actually performing better in the polls before he officially jumped in the race. So I think that says a lot. You know, and he had I'm not gonna lie, I don't think there is a formula to beating Donald Trump yet. What he was trying to do, at least in the early months, was to appeal to Trump's base while also appealing to people who don't like Trump and don't think he's presidential. To me, that was a bit of a lose-lose situation. He veered extremely to the right. Remember, there were videos that his campaign posted on social media with a very weird, sometimes homophobic content. And I think that he kind of lost his footing along the way. And now Nikki Haley, by contrast, is rising exactly at the right time. I think he might have peaked a little too soon, but we'll see. Iowa's just a few weeks away.
Rising, though, a relative term. And the polls at least suggest, which Brian breaks out into hives, as you know, Isadora, when I mention polls, but the polling suggests that everybody's fighting to be an alternative and that right now it's certainly Donald Trump's to lose. And we're going to talk more about him in a moment. Your estimation?
Wow, I think Donald Trump with he has 40 points ahead of the other candidates. I mean, I understand polls have been wrong. I'm not a pollster and not an expert in this issue, but I will say it looks like the polls have been consistently pointing in that direction, but we don't know with Trump's indictments what might happen. The one thing I think we've learned during this presidential primary is that it's become impossible to measure this campaign based on history and previous ones.
And as Isadora rightly points out, none of us are pollsters. And Brian, I know you'd run away if anybody volunteered you to be one. But as you look at what you hear about strategic or tactical missteps for the governor, what is the sense you pick up?
Well, I think the key mistake he made was trying to be more Trump than Trump, and then believing that as these indictments moved along, that support for Trump would diminish significantly. That hasn't happened. And he hasn't really adjusted to the change. In the last week or so, he's gone after Trump a little more aggressively, but all of the time that he spent attacking Nikki Haley and the other opponents that he had in the campaign, in a lot of ways was a wasted effort, because the guy that you need to take out to win the nomination is Donald Trump. And
was there anybody who could really do that? We talk about what went wrong is what went wrong, and that they're all just trying to run against somebody who has an ironclad grip on the party now. And when you boil it down, it's as simple as that.
Well, I think we're going to find out just how strong an iron grip he has when the voters actually go to the polls. Now,
excellent cautionary note.
Now, I think we need to keep in mind, on a rainy day, on a snowy day in New Hampshire, fewer people will go to the polls, but the ones who will be the hardcore. And I think Donald Trump will do well, but partly because Ron DeSantis, who up until recently was believed to be his leading opponent, didn't offer a serious alternative. He's trying to do it now, but more people are thinking about Hanukkah and Christmas than they are thinking about whether or not Ronald DeSantis should replace them.
Let's concentrate more closely on the candidacy of the former president, Isadora Rangel, joining us via Zoom, member of the Miami Herald Editorial Board. And we appreciate you being with us. Isadora joined us for the GOP debate recently, and certainly buckle up, because we'll be counting on your expertise on into the new year, Isadora, that of you and Brian and others. Talk about Donald Trump, the man from Mar-a-Lago right now, as we look forward. The political calculus there, everything's swirling about him, legally, politically. Try and give our viewers kind of a compass bearing there.
Yeah, I think the calculus is he's looking at the polls and believing that that's showing the direction the primary will go on. And I think he has a grip on the party. And let's remember, the entirety of the Republican Party does not necessarily support Trump, but he has that solid, I believe, 30 to 40% who do, which splits the rest of the ticket, right? So the other candidates are fighting to be that Trump alternative. I am curious to see when candidates start dropping out. Maybe we'll have DeSantis and Haley fighting to be that anti-Trump candidate. And then how is the dynamic going to change after that?
If you told somebody 25 years ago with the political baggage his opponents argue, let me say, and with the legal baggage that he had, they'd say nobody could even think of being in a race and having a shot. What's changed in the body politic? As you all cover this, and as an editorial board do outreach, what's changed in the landscape?
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing that I think has changed a lot is Americans have lost faith in institutions. So it becomes a lot easier for Donald Trump or any politician. We saw George Santos try that, but not as successfully, attacking the DOJ, attacking the FBI, attacking these democratic institutions that have open indictments against them. And it becomes very easy when we lose trust in government, when we lose trust in law enforcement, when we lose trust in the media, it becomes a lot easier for candidates to come in and be that person who is the anti-establishment voice, it becomes a lot easier for Donald Trump to dismiss any attacks or any credible evidence that's presented against him. And I think, even if we think past Donald Trump, I think this will continue to be a very big threat to democracy. And we're talking about the United States, but we're talking about a global phenomenon as well.
Talk about, amplify on that, a very big threat to democracy. We hear that before. Amplify on your thought.
Yeah, think about this, and not to blame social media. I know that's kind of something we've heard time and time again, but the amount of misinformation that you see on social media, the splintering of the news business, where you have news that's catered to people based on their political views. I think that all of those things put alone, they might not be as problematic. And when we put them together, you have a considerable share of the United States population and voters who believe that the 2020 elections were stolen. you know, and not to, I don't want to overemphasize and say that our democracy is lost or we're becoming a fascist country. I'm not saying that. I think it's happening very slowly and in ways that we might not necessarily notice right now. It's never going to be like we saw in the 20s and 30s, right? And I think that's the mistake sometimes people make, is to say, gosh, like the next thing will be a Mussolini. It's not going to happen like that. But I think a democracy only works when people believe, right, in the democratic system. And we're seeing that that's not necessarily the case a lot of the times on both sides of the aisle.
Brian, before we go to break, I want to let you also offer your thoughts as we look at this the larger issues that we're talking about, not so much the horse race, but about where we are.
Well, I'm going to be a little bit optimistic about all this. I share a lot of the concerns that Isadora talks about, but I'll also just note that despite the turmoil of January 6th, 2020, despite all the accusations that Trump and his supporters make about the deep state and all this, the system by and large is still working. Is it fragile? Absolutely. But after Biden took office, we moved on to the next election. And whoever becomes president next time will be because voters went to the polls. So I find some comfort in that, but I do think we're very, very fragile right now.
We'll talk about the Biden factor. We'll also talk about the legislative session upcoming in Florida, all of that and more with Isadora Rangel, Brian Crowley, right after the break.